Hi, my name is Dr. Shyam Ranganathan, and this video is titled Yoga Sutra Book 4, Autonomy. So we have been following the Yoga Sutra in this four-part series on the topic, and each video in this four-part series covers one book of the Yoga Sutra. And so we're at the end of the Yoga Sutra. We're on book 4 now. And the idea has been to give a little taste, an overview of the Yoga Sutra, right, that you would study at greater length in a course on the topic, but to give you enough information about what the Yoga Sutra is about and what it is that we would study at greater length in a course on the Yoga Sutra. And so book 4 really functions to wrap up many of the themes of the Yoga Sutra. So I'm just going to do a little quick recap. So in book 1, the theme is about yoga as the practice of taking charge of our own lives, right? Each one of our own lives is something we take charge of by practicing yoga. And the practice of yoga, this is book 2, has 3 essential parts. And the 3 essential parts are devotion to Ishvara, which is the ideal of personhood, defined by the traits of unconservatism and self-governance, and then 2 further practices, one tapas, which is the practice of brushing up and pushing against boundaries, producing heat, friction, and the other final practice is swadhyaya, which literally means self-study, but in the context of yoga, where to study is to control, when you self-study, you self-control. And so these 3 practices together as how we unfold taking responsibility for our own life, right? It involves really kind of correcting our past mistakes by pushing against boundaries that we let cement, right? And then making more room for ourselves by pushing against these boundaries, and then also working on our own self-determination. All right, and all of this is part of this devotion to the Lord. Okay, as this ideal of personhood, and the idea is that as you perfect this practice of devotion to this ideal, you yourself start to exemplify these traits of being unconservative and self-governing, free to move past errors and restrictions and into a future that's receptive to you, right? And then book 3 cashes out the 3-step program according to which you exercise this type of movement towards greater capacity and knowledge and power, right? And it involves focusing on something, concentrating, but that's different than obsessing about it. It's about orienting yourself to that object and then being moved by that object, understanding it synoptically, and then being with that object. And so, if you think about the ideal of the practice as something that you can direct these 3 steps towards, then you not only start to understand the ideal of the practice, you start to understand the ideal of the practice from different perspectives, right, of engagements, and then you end up exemplifying these very traits yourself. Okay, so that takes us to the end of book 3. Book 4 is called the Kaivalya-pada. Kaivalya means autonomy, isolation. It's a common mistake in reading the Yoga Sutra to start here and then work backwards. And then what people do is they bring their assumptions about what isolation means, right? It's often a kind of negative association, and then read it back in the Yoga Sutra as though the point of yoga is to kind of run away from the world or withdraw from reality. But every step along the way has been about really integrating ourselves into reality, about breaking out of our shells and becoming people who are in charge of our own lives. So this way of reading isolation as though it's somehow you're skipping out on your life is like weirdly wrong, right? Really, what you're isolated from when you start to live a life of responsibility are other things in the public world, right? But that's not to say that you're not with them. You're just not impinged by them. You're not coerced by them, right? So like I can be in a room filled with objects. And so long as my personal boundaries are intact and the boundaries of these objects are intact, right? Each thing in this room is isolated, but I'm still with all of these things, right? The problem, problems happen when there's all this movement and then the boundaries start to get confused, and that's the way people get hurt and injured. So isolation isn't about kind of running away from reality. It's about having your boundaries intact. And specifically, it's about being isolated from nature. So throughout the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali has been contrasting natural explanation with personal explanation. Nature is Prakriti, persons are Purusha, and nature is the realm of causal explanations, and these are explanations that come from the outside. And then personal explanations are these ethical explanations, these moral explanations. And when we have an ethical explanation, it's from the inside out. It's because of choice and responsibility that we can make sense of ethical explanation. And that's very different than being coerced or forced into something, right? In the case of causality, the arrow of influence comes from the outside. In the case of responsibility, it goes from the inside out. So Kaivalya, or isolation, then, is very much an isolation from being coerced from the outside. But this is only possible once we've completely changed the tone of our life from one that's explained by external influence to one that's completely about dharma, which is the Indian word for ethics. And so, according to Patanjali, we gain our freedom after a dharma mega samadhi, after a samadhi or being with this cleansing, this cleanse of moral considerations. All right, so what are these general themes of the Yoga Sutra that we can take away and apply to our lives, right? So I think one really important theme of the Yoga Sutra is that we become free not from running away from challenges, right? We become free by facing challenges of an external world that doesn't always seem friendly, right? But how do we face this challenge? We face it by changing that world, right? That world is a different world when we don't participate in it. It starts to change and become far more hospitable to us when we start inserting ourselves in it. But we start inserting ourselves in it as we practice yoga, because practicing yoga is about changing the kind of explanation that makes sense of our life, right? When we are excluded from life, it's like everything in reality is pushing us out. But really what's going on is we are not making the effort to change the tide, according to Patanjali, right? We're treating the world as though it's real and factual independently of our choices. But to practice yoga is to start to work on ourselves, and then as we work on ourselves, reality changes, the facts change, right? And as we perfect our own lordliness, the world itself changes. It becomes more lordly, more unconservative, more self-governing. All right, so thanks so much for watching these videos on the Yoga Sutra. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please leave a comment below. Very interested in your thoughts and reactions. Thanks so much.